thing, having octaves. So today we're talking about the liturgies, the liturgy of the Ordinariate, some of our traditions, some of our holy days that make us kind of who we are and maybe different from the rest of the church, Catholic Church you might be aware of, but also the same but different, which in itself is very Catholic. So fun fact, so octaves, we'll start there, right? Octave is 8 days, obviously, octave. And our high holy days, if you will, each have an octave associated with them. This is the same in the rest of the wider Catholic world, although sometimes it doesn't get as much play, it doesn't get as much airtime as in the wider church as we get it here in the Ordinariates. But the octave of Easter is the highest and the holiest of days. So if you consider an octave 8 days of the same day. So today is Easter just like Sunday was Easter, just like yesterday was Easter, just like tomorrow will be Easter. We celebrate with the same sense of solemnity, if at all possible in our liturgy, each day of an octave. So where we have Easter Sunday, but Monday was also Easter Sunday, and Tuesday is also Easter Sunday, and Wednesday is also Easter Sunday, all the way through to next Sunday, which will still be Easter Sunday. And then we move on to the second week of Easter, in the Easter season. So we commemorate those things in a very special way in the Catholic Church all around, and we are no exception. There's also the octave of Christmas, which ranks a little less. And right in between them, actually, is the octave of Pentecost. We celebrate the octave of Pentecost, which doesn't technically exist in the modern calendar, but we still honor that week in the modern one, right? But we in the Ordinary have been allowed to maintain the octave of Pentecost, which is when you folks, many of you will be confirmed and received into the Holy Catholic Church. And so we'll remember that octave in Pentecost as well. And again, Monday will be Pentecost, and Tuesday will be Pentecost, and Wednesday will be Pentecost, and for a whole 8 days. So never you fear, if you missed it the first day, you can come back the second day. It's still Pentecost. So that's a wonderful way to celebrate. So my name is, for those of you who don't remember or haven't met me before, I came here last semester. My name is Tim Carruthers. I'm the Director of Worship for the Ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter's. So I help the bishop out with our liturgies here in the Ordinariate throughout the United States and Canada. And so I help the bishop with his particular liturgies when he goes here and there and everywhere to celebrate the Mass and the other liturgies of the Divine Worship Ordinariate. And I also help our parishes and our priests when they have liturgical questions. And from liturgy flows catechesis, because all catechesis moves toward sacramental worship. Catechesis is supposed to inform our minds and our intellect so that we know what we are doing, and what we pray is what we believe, and what we believe is what we pray. So catechesis and worship go hand in hand. And so part of my job in worship is also to help out in the catechetical realm. So that's me, and that's my job. My wife and I have been parishioners here for about 15 years now. We have 3 kiddos who have all been baptized here. And our daughter received her first communion a couple of years ago. And we have a daughter who's not Catholic, because they can't be baptized. If you have questions about that, see me after. We have deeper things to discuss. So the Ordinariate liturgies, traditions, and holy days are what I'm here to talk with you all about. So we'll take them in order: liturgy, traditions, and holy days. So liturgy, our Ordinariate liturgy, as hopefully you've surmised by now, is again the same but different. It should look like other Catholic. You've been to other Roman Catholic churches in your life. You've gone to other parishes in the diocese or wherever you may come from. You notice that it is very, very, very similar, but it also may sound a little different. Just enough to where if you start going back and forth, you'll get tongue-tied, right? You'll start saying the creed in one version, and you'll end up, consubstantial being with the Father, when you start saying the creed. So what makes it, why, and how is kind of the way that I like to go about things. So what is our Ordinariate liturgy? Our Ordinariate liturgy was given to us by the church in our foundings in the Anglicanorum Cedibus Constitution. So Pope Benedict XVI gave us Anglicanorum Cedibus. In that document, Anglicanorum Cedibus, gatherings of Anglicans, it said that we were allowed to maintain some of the patrimonial, some of the liturgical texts and practices that led us to communion with Rome, led us to come and swim the Tiber and join the full communion of the Catholic Church. And so we were allowed to do that, to maintain those liturgical texts. So within that constitution that made us who we are, there is the liturgy and liturgical text. So how that actually came about then is that there was questions. So are we just allowed to basically like bring over the old Book of Common Prayer and the Book of Occasional Services just as is, and we just kind of throw in some Catholic stuff and zhuzh it up real nice, with some, with Roman canon and all that. And what Rome said, was basically no. But what was done is a commission was formed. A commission was formed by the auspices of that constitution. And that commission looked at all of the different Anglican and Episcopalian and other Anglo-Catholic, all the different, right? The Anglican communion is a big umbrella, right? And there's a lot of, and the way we do it here in America is not the way that they do it in England, is not the way they do it in Australia, it's not the way they do it in Wales versus England. They'll have an argument about it. And Scotland's going to get in the middle of it too, and Ireland's going to be like, what are y'all doing? And then you've got, all the different permutations of Anglicanism and Anglo-Catholic worship thrown in the mix. And so to get all these representatives of all these groups into a room and say, hash it out, right? What is the patrimony? And Rome finally got a group together, and they talked and they discussed and they looked over all the different books that each of them had been using, and Rome distilled it out. He said, and by Rome I mean Monsignor Lopes, who's now Bishop Lopes, as the representative of the Vatican, along with others, but he was kind of the main instigator from not the doctrine of worship, or dicastery of worship, which you would think, but the dicastery of the doctrine of faith. Because as we pray is as we believe. And so the words of the prayer, as beautiful as they are, needed to be theologically accurate. And so the doctrine of faith is the one that spearheaded it to make sure that the prayers that were brought in were doctrinally sound, and they were theologically accurate according to the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. And so, members from the dicastery of worship and the dicastery of faith got together with these other Anglican convert folks, and they hashed out these things. And what they came up with were the liturgical texts that we are allowed to use in our patrimony. So, because like the 79 U.S. prayer book is different than the 1662 English prayer book, is different than the 1920 or 61 Canadian prayer book. So we're not going to have all 3, 5, 6, 10 different books. We're going to have one book, and everybody's going to be unhappy. No, I'm joking. Right? And so that's where we get what's called the divine worship texts. So divine worship, the missal was promulgated. The divine worship, the occasional services was promulgated, and the rest, and on and on. So divine worship are the patrimonial liturgical texts that Rome has given us, right? This is your patrimony. Part of that was a winnowing down of things that had coalesced in Anglicanism that included things from like the Ambrosian rite, which is not Roman, right? It's from Ambrose, St. Ambrose of Milan, the Milanese rite. So the Ambrosian rite has beautiful things. and Anglicans said, that's beautiful, we're going to use it. And so they brought that into, some Anglicans brought that into their practice. Not all, right? So there's again that question. Some other elements that were brought in, and some were just creations within Anglicanism that were beautiful and made lovely, but they're not Roman. And so Rome kind of distilled and said, this comes from us, from Roman practice. We can keep this. This comes from ancient Roman practice that pre-exists any reformations or anything like that. That's wonderful. These are things that were brought in after the fact from Roman practice. Great, right? But these other things that come from other spiritual traditions that aren't Roman, we're going to set those aside and focus on what is Roman and what really is at the heart of Anglican and English practice, right? Whether it's from Rome or whether it's purely from English practice, right? But what are those things that really brought you to the to the doorstep of the Catholic Church?
So we're talking about the pew missal or blue book is in the back?
So that's part of So what we have. Well, let me back up a second. So what we have is this is the study version. It's the exact same book, but it's very, very small, as what's on the altar, right? There's the altar missal, pew, and this is the study missal. Divine worship, the missal. And then we have, tied to that, the divine worship, the occasional services, right? Divine worship, occasional services is the other sacraments. This is where we have baptism and confirmation, funerals, weddings, those sorts of things are all in here. And so we have divine worship, pastoral care of the sick and dying, right? And so just like the modern Roman, it's green in the modern Roman book. If you've ever seen it, if you've ever been in a hospital and the chaplain's coming to see you, it's a little green book. It's called a little green book, right? But ours is black. Very stately, gold. But it is the same book, but our prayers of it, which I'll get to it in a moment. And then we have divine worship, the daily office, right? So the liturgy of the hour, morning and evening prayer, night prayer, again, according to our practices. More on that. So these are the divine worship series of texts. These are what the commission directed by Rome, with people from England, from America, from Australia, all the rest, all together, came together and discerned and prayed over and discerned what is ultimately our patrimony, and what else is things that have come and gone by the wayside. And so what is it that makes this Roman and Anglican, English patrimony?
So I'm an Anglo-Catholic.
There you go.
I love that you actually give us some representation. We don't even mention it up. I have a 1662 Book of Common Prayer, and I'm ACC Anglo-Catholic.
Okay.
So part of the G3. What would be the difference between? I mean, 1662. What would be the difference between this and divine worship missal? Because I've heard some things about it's the consecrations and whatnot, but I don't truthfully know. Obviously, the 39 articles, but we don't submit those anyways.
Right. So that's a great segue for me. So where this began, right? Because the Ordinariate started, in 2011 and on, where they were founded, and that's the Anglican or the Anglican Janus. That's the Ordinariates. Before the Ordinariates, and stop me if you've heard this stuff. Just do this, and I'll skip it. But the pastoral provision in 1982, 81, 82, John Paul II received former Episcopalians who were Episcopalian priests, and Anglican priests, who wished to join. They were already received into full communion. They wanted to maintain their priesthood, though, as Roman priests, to be ordained as Roman Catholic priests. And John Paul II allowed for this, right? So this is where we have merit. The first of those, not the first, it's happened that these men were allowed to be ordained as Roman priests with their married spouses. But also, some of them, including our parish here, came in with other members of their Episcopalian or Anglican parish, right? And so this is the first inkling of, can we maintain some of these prayers? And so the first we came in 1984. This was St. Simon and Jude Parish. That became Our Lady of Walsingham Catholic Parish. That's why this is St. Jude Hall. But what John Paul II gave us was this called the Book of Divine Worship, which is why we have divine worship to fill in the blank. This is no longer in practice, in use, right? If you see it, give it to me or burn it. But Book of Divine Worship is the 1979 prayer book with the Roman canon of the Mass inserted here. So if you look at it, it's exactly, if you've ever seen a 1979 prayer book, it is the exact 1979 prayer book. It even has, like, I remember it was, for me, so I came in from Presbyterianism into the Catholic Church, and then I came here, and like for Anglicans, some Anglicans and Anglo-Catholics are like, oh, these are my prayers. It wasn't my prayers as a Presbyterian, some of them were, but it was like my language, right? It was that hieratic, that Shakespearean, Elizabethan,
Scottish.
Yeah, Scots, right? I try to throw in some of the Scots prayers when I'm allowed to. But even like instead of for ordinary time, it's like the Sunday next to whatever date. You're like, I can't do math. What day is that? But yeah, Rite 1 and Rite 2, like all the 1979 lingo in this book. And then when the Ordinariates came around, this was set aside to create, and part of it was to create the Divine Worship Missal. The Divine Worship Missal is set on the format of the modern Roman Missal. The Roman Missal, 3rd edition, Editio Typica, right? This is, if you look at the format and structure of our Missal, and you set it next to the modern Roman Missal, the structure is exactly the same. The prayers are different, because the prayers come from like the 1662 Missal, the 1662 prayer book, the old Cranmerian, Thomas Cranmer, right? The old collects. The collects that are in here, a lot of them are not the same that you would. So if you go to Mass on a Sunday at a modern Roman parish, the Mass is going to sound similar, but the collect, that opening prayer, and some of the prefatory prayers, prayers over the gifts, post-communion prayers, are going to be different because they come from our English pattern, our Anglican books. So to answer your question, this does not look like the 1662, but the prayers are from the 1662, except for then like we have the Roman canon as the Eucharistic prayer. So the Eucharistic prayers that are written after, even the beautiful Scots one is not in there, right? From the Book of Church Order for the Scots, but so it's the Roman canon. But again, the format and structure is this way. This was also because this was the Book of Common Prayer, right? Which is totally unusable as an altar missal. It's just to try and, you'd have like 10 ribbons, 30 ribbons to try and get everywhere you need to be, and even still, it's just, so this is why, when we had this, everybody had like a spiral or a three-ring binder where they just rewrote it in a usable missal style. That's what everybody ended up doing. We had one, everybody had one. But you had people who were tied to this, who are like the Book of Common Prayer style, and then you have people from what's called the Anglican Missal tradition, or the English Missal tradition. And you have those folks who are used to, that missal is set up like the old Roman Missal, the pre-1962 Reformed, the pre-Vatican II Reformed Missal. The English Missal is basically that in translation. And so you have those two kind of groups that all came in and through the Ordinariate, and they all want to be part of the Roman Catholic Church, but they have these two different traditions, and their books look completely different. They're completely different. They have the same prayers, but they're ordered in a different way, and they're formatted in a different way, and so that's why Rome said, part of why Rome said, this is for everybody, right? And it's going to be again, we are modern Roman Catholics. We're not trying to be, extraordinary form in English, right? Even though some of the Anglo-Catholic and some of the, Roman Episcopalian, that's kind of the vibe they're going with the English Missal, right? That's kind of the format that they grew up in and that they came into the church with. That's not what we are, right? We're not extraordinary form in English. But on the other hand, we're not like Rite 2 Episcopalians, Rite 1 Episcopalians, that follow the Book of Common Prayer and all this kind of stuff. We are Roman Catholics using the Roman Catholic Missal with prayers included, right? Or transferred, right? Switched, that come from our background and our patrimony, right? Clarissa.
When we got these new books, is that when you stopped using the Anglican use? Because I keep hearing people that come in the shop and say, they talk amongst each other and say, oh, this is Catholic with Anglican use. And I don't correct them because I'm not
Sure. It's a hard answer. We used to use the term Anglican use because that's one of the terms that's out there. Like there's a use of the Roman Rite, and we kind of are a use. It's a use of the Roman Rite, right? We're a Roman Rite that's allowed certain different, like our chant. One of the things that's different about us, that's specific to us, is getting into again that what makes us who we are. So our prayers are formatted and structured in the modern Roman format, but the prayers themselves, the words, the texts, are not just necessarily hieratic, right? Hieratic meaning like more poetic than your normal vernacular, right? It's not necessarily just that. Some of the prayers are actually different. Same spot, but a different prayer because the Anglicans wrote a different prayer. And it's a beautiful prayer, and Rome decided it's theologically accurate, and it's all well and good, so keep it. Where those were like, no, that's not theologically accurate, right? Cut that one out, find a different one that fits that spot, right? That sort of thing. But by and large, the prayers are from our Anglican background in this modern Roman Missal context. Anglican use was just kind of how do we describe ourselves back then, and a lot of times we use Anglican use. Now it's the ordinariate form of the Roman Catholic Mass. Right? We are divine worship, right? Mass according to divine worship, right? It's a mouthful, and so people just say the ordinariate form, right? The top kind of form versus use. That's a real like, heady, nitpicky, nuanced distinction to be made, and I don't even think most people who use the terms don't know what they mean. I don't even know what they mean half the time. I try and use it in some places, and they say, "No, that's not right." And you go, "Tell me what's right." Then and they say something like, "No, that's not right." Who's right? Quid patrimonies.
So you were talking a lot there just a minute ago about how we are Roman Catholic. If kind of like how like in Eastern traditions, we give them almost like Byzantine Catholics or Eastern Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that it's not okay for somebody here to call themselves an Anglo-Catholic?
Yeah, so we are not Anglo-Catholics for a couple of different reasons. One being that Anglo-Catholics, and this is part of the reason why we don't use Anglican use, and the bishop is very adamant about not using the term Anglican, simply to clear the air, that we are not Protestant. We have so many Catholics who won't come here, or otherwise are like, can I receive communion here? Because we use, we have the term Anglican attached to us. And so Anglo-Catholics are a particular branch of the Anglican communion, and so we wouldn't call ourselves Anglo-Catholics. We are Roman Catholics, We are part of the Roman Catholic Church. We are a diocese. The Ordinariate is a diocese, territorial diocese of the Roman Catholic Church with a Roman Catholic bishop.
It wouldn't be like a predated schism.
No, so there was question in the early discussions, right? Would this be a uniate church, right? So like the Byzantine uniates, right? A uniate church is a lot of the Eastern churches who are still in union with Rome, but they have their own canon law, they have their own juridic position and all that stuff. Those are uniate churches. And is this a uniate church? Father A. Nichols wrote a book about the Anglican uniate church, ? And that's not what we are. And so we don't have, for example, we don't have our own juridical presence. Our canon law is the canon of the Roman Catholic Church. Right. Our bishops, etc., are given by the Pope in the Roman Catholic Church. So we are nothing other than, so we are more akin to like the religious orders, like a Dominican. Like the Dominicans have a Dominican use of the Roman Rite, where they have their own certain prayers and their own certain ways of ceremony, right? How they enact the Mass, because they are Dominicans, but they are fully Roman Catholics, right? We are fully Roman Catholics. They have a Governor General, right, who's in charge of the Dominicans as a religious order, and he has the rights and privileges. He is an ordinariate, right? He has the rights and privileges of a bishop, even if he's not a bishop. The Governor General, or the Minister General of the Dominicans, or the Dominican Franciscans, or the whoever's. So in that sense, we are very much more similar to that. In juridic systems, we are like the archdiocese. So the military archdiocese used to be the military ordinariate until they got an archbishop, and they started calling themselves an archdiocese. So we're much more. We are actually almost identical in juridic presence to the military archdiocese. So hopefully that makes sense. So what makes it getting on that concept of use, right? One of the things that makes us makes our liturgy, distinct is obviously the one that most people see or hear is the hieratic language. That's beautiful and it's wonderful, and it's what drew me to be here as a Catholic was the familiarity of that to my ear and to my heart, but also the chant. So we have Anglican chant as opposed to Gregorian chant. There's Gregorian chant, there's modes of Gregorian chant, all this kind of thing. There's Anglican chant that is settings of the English, right, of the English psalms and all the rest. That is set to a different set of tones that have been created in the Anglican Church, and so we maintain that. Just like if you go to a Dominican church. And you go to or you hear them sing the Salve Regina, it's going to sound different than the Roman Catholic Salve Regina. It's the Dominican Salve Regina. It's different tones. Same words, same everything, but different. It sounds different. You can YouTube it. The Dominican Salve Regina. It's beautiful. It's haunting. But it ain't the Salve Regina that every Catholic knows. Okay, fun fact. So when I came in, I was not Catholic yet in university, but I was in the honors college, and we were reading Benedict's Rule in the honors college and in the great book section. And so my professor brought in the Liber Usualis, which is this like tomes. It's like this, full of all the chants for the Mass and for everything in Latin with all the little notations. And he asked, who here can read Latin and can read music? And I said yes. And so he gave me something easy, right, to experience Benedict, right? Benedict was monks, and so chanting chanting the hours and all the rest. Gregorian chant, Benedictine monks, all that. So here, take this. Here's an easy one, the Salve Regina, right? But he doesn't tell me that he didn't even use the name. He just hands me the book and says, do this with it. But I was taught in the classical Latin, so if you're familiar with Latin, there's two different ways, classical and ecclesial. Ecclesial uses like the V is a V, right? And the C is a C, right? But in classical, it's hard C's, and the V's are W's, right? And the G's are not J's, they're all G's or hard G's. So I pull it up, and having never read or sung the Salve Regina a day in my life, I look at it and I go, Salve Regina, Mater miser, vita dulcedo. And I sound like an idiot. And they're all laughing at me because they're all laughing and giggling. And he explains the difference. And I'll never let it down.
Can you do it now?
I just did, man. So, these are things that make us who we are. The other pieces of our liturgical patrimony, I want to keep moving. The other pieces of our liturgical patrimony, obviously, the Mass. Some of the things that we were allowed to bring in that's different than the modern Roman Mass, it's really kind of really beautiful into the Mass itself, is so like the sprinkling rite at the beginning of Mass. Ours looks different than a modern Roman sprinkling rite. They changed it up a little bit in the modern Roman rite from what it used to be, and we get to maintain the way it used to be and the way it is in the Anglican rule. And it's a beautiful entry into the Mass, especially during Easter season. We have the last Gospel that we are allowed to maintain, the last Gospel after Mass. We have what's called the Decalogue, praying the Decalogue, which is part of our Anglican patrimony. So when you were here during Lenten Sundays, you heard us sing, you prayed with us the whole Decalogue. Outside of Lent, we pray the summary of the law. But both of those are options. Basically, they take the place of each other, the Decalogue or the summary of the law. But we have those. We have the Great Litany, which you heard at the beginning and end of the beginning of Advent and the beginning and end of Lent. You heard the Great Litany being sung, which is another beautiful part of our patrimony. Again, the litany actually existed as part of the Litany of Saints, this great, bigger, longer litany in the Roman Rite. But the Litany of Saints kind of nowadays gets truncated to just the saints and not all that we beseech thee, O Lord, and for this and for that, and for these people and for that people we beseech thee, O Lord. Graciously hear us, O Lord. We lose all that, we've lost all that in the modern version of the Litany of Saints. But, here it is in the Great Litany.
So I have a question about some things that are striking different to me. So for instance, at the end of Mass, when we say the St. Michael prayer, after it's over, I know in the Archdiocese they'll say, Sacred Heart of Jesus, have mercy on us. But we don't say that. I feel like we're like taking Jesus out. I know we say, I can't remember what the call is, what the response is, so that we may be worthy of the promises of Christ. I mean, I'm just wondering, like, why would they?
So those are local devotions, and other parishes might do different things, right? There's the Leonine prayers from that Pope Leo the 13th brought into the private devotions outside of Mass. So Mass is from the introit, or from the in the name of the Father, right? The invocation from the introit at the beginning through to the blessing and dismissal at the end. Anything before the introit is not Mass. Anything after the blessing and dismissal is not Mass. They're devotions. Some are private devotions, and some are public devotions or public acts of piety that the Church has allowed. So, like the sprinkling rite is before Mass; it comes before the introit, and so it's not Mass; it's pre-Mass. The last Gospel comes after Mass, right? It's not part of Mass, and so same with the St. Michael prayers. Some places, the full Leonine prayers would say the Salve Regina and the St. Michael and three Hail Marys and the Sacred Heart of Jesus. We place all our trust in thee. Those prayers together. That's all told were the Leonine prayers. And so each parish kind of does all or some had, actually the St. Michael prayer is a new thing. New being like, maybe in the last 7, 8 years we started doing the St. Michael prayer in the Mass. Before that, all we had was the litany. And the litany was really because Father stays back in the back to shake hands, and Deacon has to go back up to the sacristy to go clean up, because he's a deacon, service, right? And so while he's going up, he would pray a litany of saints, our saints of our church, right? The litany of the saints whose relics are buried here on campus, in our altars, and in our tower, kept in our reliquary. And so he would pray those prayers as he went back up. So that was just our, and so more recently we've added the St. Michael prayer. And like 8 a.m. Mass on Sunday, just somebody from the parish just started belting out the Salve Regina, and people joined in. And that was just kind of grassroots stuff. That wasn't, Father just said, they're singing it, I'm not going to stop them. So that's where that comes from. It's not any intentional, it's just kind of, these are the things that we've grown up and grown with as the parish, and that have come to us. So, other thing though that is very much from our English patrimony is our way of doing the Divine Office, the Liturgy of the Divine Office, Liturgy of the Hours is our way of doing it, written in the Divine Worship Daily Office book, is something that's absolutely beautiful that Thomas Cranmer did in the early days of the Reformation, where that was actually a beautiful thing, where he said, people say that while Cranmer and them got rid of the monasteries, they did not, in England, they did not get rid of the monastic. So the prayers of the monastery were given to the parishioners. And the parishioners were expected to pray the morning and evening prayers that the monks had been doing, and the nuns had been doing, even after their expulsion of the monasteries. And so the way that but Cranmer recognized that you could not, the local, farmers and workers, could not be expected to do matins at 4 in the morning and 3 in the morning and stay up all night and then get up and do lauds and mass and then come back in and do all these prayers. So what he did was matins and lauds. So matins is the pre-dawn offices, and lauds is the dawn office. And then in the evening you have vespers at the evening and compline right before bed. So those are the kind of like what we call the hinge hours. The church's documents call them the hinge hours, the cardinal hours, the principal hours. And so what he did was he took matins and lauds and put them together, and he put vespers and compline and put them together. So that you could pray, come into the church on your way out to the fields or your way into work and pray morning prayer together, and then go to work. And then on your way back home in the evening, you could stop by the church and pray your evening prayer together. And so it was a corporate act. It wasn't just the monks and nuns. And then more likely today, a lot of times it's seen as kind of a private devotional. It's for the priests to do, and they do that on their own time, right? Or it's for the nuns and monks to do in the convents. But it was very much seen in the early in Anglicanism and in the early days that this is a corporate act of the parish, of the people, and that you're expected to do these and the Mass, right, or and the communion on Sunday. And so that's why this book is a hardback. It feels like a hymnal, looks like a hymnal, because it's supposed to live in the pew racks. It's not supposed to be the pretty leather bound with gold leaf and all that stuff, right? It's supposed to be in the pews and prayed corporately as a group. There's no readings from the Bible like the lessons, right? All this is the Bible. But like the separate lessons, they're expected to be read from the lectern, right? Up in the, from the Bible up at the lectern. You're in the pews reading from this, and then the person goes up and reads from the lectern. So, very much part of our patrimony there, the Liturgy of the Hours, the way that we do it here. And that's something that's very specific to us. Let's see. Divine worship text is the same but different. Oh, the other thing is it's not published or anything, and it's just but I've collected over the years a number of other things. One of the things that we do well is offices, like the Divine Office. So modern Roman, a lot of things, our liturgies, the other liturgies, like even this stuff today, would be tied to a liturgy of the Word. Right? And the liturgy of the Word is that you come in, you say the Old Testament reading, and you do a psalm, or you do a New Testament, you read a gospel, there's a homily, or a reflection, or a thing that you do, but it's a liturgy of the Word. So it functions like the first part of the Mass. In our patrimony, these things were done not tied to a liturgy of the Word, but tied to an office. So you would pray a psalm, and you would pray a Kyrie, you would close it with a Kyrie, the Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy, the Our Father, and then what's called suffrages, right? Those verse and responses I said that we use a lot of. And that you would learn, our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth, right? You would know all these, oh Lord, hear our prayer, and then our cry come unto thee. You would know these responses. And so over the years, we've been collecting, like this is, so kind of a book of blessings. But rather than the book of blessings, where everything, all the blessings, like blessing an Advent reading, blessing a home, blessing of mothers, after birth, all those things, blessing of ornaments for the church, right? Statues and things, where the modern Roman would give it to a liturgy of the Word, we give it to a praying in the office. So here's a psalm, do the thing, bless the thing, and then our Father, Lord hear our prayer, or Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy, our Father, conclude. Right? So it's a different practice, right? Liturgy of the Word versus office. And so for us, the office takes precedent. And so a lot of ours come from old, again, just like these come from old books. The old books were called the Book of Offices, right, where you would gather these things. So they wouldn't have a book of blessings, they'd have a book of offices. And that was where all the blessings were. So, moving over with our last few minutes, traditions and holy days. Traditions, we have a number of traditions, but a lot of our traditions are tied to the holy days, so we're kind of saying the same thing in both aspects. So, traditions, most of our traditions revolve around the holy days, feasts and fasts, processions. We do a lot of processions, that's a Roman thing. We just happen to do it better. But what made Roman ritual known as Roman ritual, why people appreciated the Roman ritual, was its simplicity, the simplicity of our chant and the simplicity of the actions, and processions. Because you remember Rome, how did Rome celebrate anything? How did they celebrate a victory? Caesar would go running around the city of Rome in a chariot, and someone whispering, a slave whispering in his ear, and it's Transit Gloria. And he'd go to stations and he'd stop, right? That's why you have stational churches, because then Caesar's gone, but the Pope goes around and he goes on these stations, right? He goes to each of these stations. Each of the places in Rome had 7 deacons that were in charge, and each of those deacons had 7 subdeacons or acolytes who followed around and helped run the things. And then when the bishop would come to that spot, he'd have 7 acolytes, 7 subdeacons carrying 7 candles. Why does the bishop have 7 candles on the altar? Because 7, right, was the number of his subdeacons with their candles running around, acolytes running around. So, feasts, fasts, processions, these are all part of our traditions. We have a number of traditions here locally. If you were here at the vigil, you saw one of our main ones, St. Lawrence Grill. This is like the 22nd year of St. Lawrence Grill, where we come out after the Easter vigil at about midnight. We've been in there for 3 hours and 5 minutes. Father said today, this last Sunday, Saturday. It was Sunday by the time we got out. And then we come out here and we have a bunch of big old griddles, gridirons, and we cook a bunch of meat and we have a bunch of beverages, tasty beverages, and maybe some cigars and other smokables, pipes and such. And then we just hang out until I think that they close down at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. One time I was here until 4 in the morning because I had to lock up. Don't ever do that. So we have the St. Lawrence Grill. we have the St. Joseph's altar. Fun thing, St. Joseph's altar. St. Joseph is a beautiful thing. It's Sicilian, folks. We ain't Sicilian. But one of our founding families was Sicilian, and so they brought over this lovely tradition of the St. Joseph altar into our venerable Anglican patrimony. So we have the St. Joseph's altar. It has nothing to do with Anglicanism or English or anything like that, but it is our parish, and it's our early founding Christians that brought that in for us to share. We love to do our feasts. We love to have our fasts. So Ember Days and Rogation Days and things of that nature. So one of the things that we do maintain, and this is something as a member of the Ordinariate that you are beholden to maintain the Ember Days. Ember Days is something fire, like embers, but it's actually imbrin from the Old English. That meant cycle, or it might have been from a mangling of the German version of Quatschember. That was the 4 quarter days. And so it's the seasonal changing of the year, right? And so you have the embers, the 4 sets of ember days. They are Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, and you think, why? What happened to Thursday? Why didn't Thursday do anything? Because Wednesday is the day that Jesus was betrayed. Friday's the day he died. Saturday's the day he rebelled, right? And so those are the ember days. And so each of those times we fast, except Pentecost embers, because octave. So it's Meat Friday for everyone. So octave, or during those ember days, it is not required because we are part of the Roman Catholic Church and is not part of the canon law or any of the precepts of our church currently, that ember days it's not required fasting on ember days, so we are not required to fast on ember days, but it is part of our tradition, our patron, so like lowercase t. It's part of our patrimony that you fast during the Wednesday, the Friday, and the Saturday, and you abstain from meat on that Friday, and except for the octave, the Pentecost, you get a freebie. And that you pray specifically for vocations on those days, just as it's the harvest days, and so the harvest of souls as well, right? And those who would go out into the harvest, into the vineyard, and so we pray for vocations. Traditionally, people would be ordained on those days; they'd be ordained to the priesthood on those days. So we have ember days, rogation days. We beat the bounds on rogation day. We beat the bounds, meaning you go out and you process all around your parish grounds, and the little kids would be given sticks. Sounds like a horrible idea. But they would beat the bounds, meaning they would beat the bushes and they'd beat the ground and all that, and they're beating out the demons, and probably some cats, around the grounds of the parish. And so you're praying the great litany, right, for intercession for the parish and its needs, while the kids are out there causing a ruckus with their sticks. So we do have that, and thanks to, I saw him pass by, Deacon Greg. He bought a bunch of sticks for our kids a few years ago, and so that was a horrible idea. Ascension, we can maintain Ascension Thursday, so that's another custom we have. So the bishop is allowed to, every bishop is allowed to decide in the U.S. whether they maintain Ascension Thursday, which gives you the full 40 days of resurrection before the 10 days, right, of Pentecost to Pentecost. So every bishop, the U.S. Conference of Bishops said that Ascension is up to them, but so we maintain the Ascension Thursday. So you must go to Mass on Ascension. You don't have to come here. You can go to Mass at like wherever parish is close to you and your work or whatever. You have to go to Mass on that day with your personal intention to honor the Ascension on that day. So you might be able to we have it posted on the interwebs on the website, but like the Ascension College, our Ascension College, you can pray that as like your personal preparation for that Mass before Mass or during the communion or whatever. When you get back to your pew, you can pray the College for Ascension Day, even if you're not here and it's not. They're just celebrating Thursday in the 6th week of Easter.
You mentioned the texts and Anglican oriented is addressed, were there any physical traditions that were like ad orientem and things of that nature that were addressed?
Yeah, so obviously ad orientem is something that we are about. It's not mandated. You could have Mass versus Populum, but that just doesn't happen. I've been to one versus Populum Ordinariate Mass, and that was the bishop's ordination, because it was at the Co-Cathedral downtown, and we were just playing nice, being good, what do you call it, guests in someone else's home.
Tim, some people might not understand what ad orientem
Sure.
is.
So ad orientem is when the priest is facing the same direction as you, right? That's ad orientem, meaning toward the east. Versus populum is whenever he's facing versus the populum, facing the people. So in the old practice, the old practice of the Roman Rite and the Western rites is that he's facing east, ad orientem, facing the rising sun. Get it? Risen sun, rising sun. Facing Jerusalem, facing, right, all the rest, all the beautiful analogies that's there. So he's facing the rising sun. And at the altar, everyone is facing this way. The misunderstanding of kind of the modern mindset is that he's turning his back on the people. And at Vatican II, turned the priest back toward the people. How nice of him. I will say that I don't, half the priests I know, probably I'd rather see their backs. They're good people, they're good. No. But the idea is, again, it's when you understand also kind of the lingo, the name of where everybody's seated is the nave, right? Nave, the ship, right? And so you want your captain facing the same way as the ship, don't you? Okay? You want him going the right direction, pointing us in the right direction. So that's ad orientem, and that is very much part of what, part of our patrimony, especially. Most of our folks that came over from Episcopalian, from the Anglican Communion, come from the Anglo-Catholic background, come from ACNA or different iterations of kind of conservative Anglican ilk. And so that's their background. Like I said, some of them, they were doing that and they were using the Anglican or English Missal tradition, and it looked very much like the Extraordinary Form Roman Rite. Some of them were turned, but they were using the Rite One Book of Common Prayer kind of formula. We came from more of the Rite One Book of Common Prayer background, also with 30 years worth of being in the Diocese of Galveston, right, as a pastoral provision parish using this, and again, playing nice with our neighbors and doing exactly, making sure we didn't make too many waves and make, too many people uncomfy, right? We have the comfy words, we don't want uncomfy words. And so trying to do that for 30 years. And so that made us who we are, where we are at the cathedral. But different parishes came in to the Ordinariate with different backgrounds. And so what the Rubrical Directory says that we have a certain amount of liturgical flexibility to make room for those different backgrounds. Not to make new things up, to say, well, now we're here, we're going to do it this way, but to be able to honor what brought you here. And what brought us here might look a little different than what brought Holy Martyrs in California here, right? Or St. John the Baptist in Bridgeport, Pennsylvania here, right? It just does, because different ones have different, because Anglican Communion is such a broad spectrum. And so what brought you here? And what of that is viable and admissible in the Roman Church? And that's what this was about. So with that, a couple of other things that are us, even though it doesn't feel like us, before I give you all some stuff to take home, is that we, although you wouldn't know it, we are a cathedral parish, and so it's hard to see. But one of the things that makes us the tradition, is that we are all about small church, right? Small church, small school, those things that we do, we try to keep it small, and rather than just build, and get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, we spin off a mission church, or we'll just build another school somewhere down the road, right? Rather than just grow and grow and grow. Why? Because part of what our mission is in the church, that Pope Francis of beloved memory, right? What he gave us is the mission of evangelization, of being missionaries in the new evangelization. And so and the way that we do that, way accomplish that, is by a mission of hospitality, right? And of homeliness. The idea that people come and they see they come here and they witness, usually a lot of times it's funerals or weddings that they come to, and they're drawn to it. They're drawn to it. They say, this looks different. What is it about this? And then they come, and it's small enough that people say, hey, you're not from around here, right? And then they introduce themselves, and they get to know that person, and they ask them about him. So then they want to come back, and then they tell their friends about this great place that they just found out about or experienced. And that doesn't happen when you're just kind of a number, or you're plugged in and you're just, one of 2,000 people in the scene in the larger churches. And so small church, that hospitality, the evangelization of hospitality, is something we're about. That is the same in our schools. That's the same in our catechesis. We're all about catechesis of the Good Shepherd, which is that hands-on, that small community and whole community catechesis. Right? We're not going to ship the kids off here and here and here. We're going to have Sunday. You're going to have Walsing Hammers for your youth group, your teens. You're going to have Federation of North American Explorers for your kind of scouting, and it's going to be on Sundays, so that the whole family can be here and be a part, not be nitpicked to death of, well, this age comes here on Tuesdays, but that age comes here on Fridays, and this one comes at 2 o'clock, but that one comes at 6 o'clock, and that's just not conducive to growth and to getting to know one another, and that knowledge then builds to that stability. It's Benedict, right? That stability makes you feel comfortable in yourself, you feel comfortable in your space, and that stability then, that comfort allows you then to be hospitable to the people that come in from outside, and allows you to welcome and to welcome them in, and they feel comfortable, and they feel stable, and they feel hospitable, and they go out in hospitality as well. So what I gave y'all was earlier an article from, I think it's Gus Denoya, Archbishop Denoya, who was on that commission, and he wrote an article along with a bunch of others for the very first year of the Ordinariate. And it's just that if you're interested in his thoughts and ruminations as a member of the commission, and what this, what and why and how the Ordinariate happened from his perspective. And then what I have here to pass around are, this is from the website, from the Ordinariate website, but it's the special days in the Ordinariate, days just to remember. And then on the back side is, what is an Ember Day and how do you observe it? As members of the Ordinariate, when y'all come, if y'all aren't already kind of, I don't know when this part happens, but we do have Ember Day e-blast. Is anybody getting those? So the Ordinariate sends out, like the Chancery, Ms. Schmidt sends out a e-blast to every member of the Ordinariate on the embers. So quarterly you get, and it's just news about the Ordinariate, but also things like the Ascension prayer for if you need it. We'll have like the Jubilee year. We have prayers in there for the Jubilee year. With the Pope's death, we'll have, and by then it'll be Pope. So the Pentecost embers will have stuff on that kind of stuff in there. So whenever that comes your way, make sure you sign up for that e-blast. I'm done, by the way, sorry.
I have a question. What if the Ordinariate,
got like 1 million people, and you know, some large number, then would it transform from being an ordinariate into a rite, or?
No, we would always be an ordinariate. There's no separate rite. It is the Roman rite. And so we're not a separate rite. We're not a UDA church, anything like that. And so what would end up happening is we just have a whole lot of parishes.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a whole lot of parishes, and probably so. Like for example, we have a deanery in Canada. So maybe like if Canada gets off the rear end, I'm joking. No, like they have a dean, and so like that dean could eventually be a bishop. We have regions.
Okay, yeah, because I was.
The way it
I had it in my head that like in order for an ordinariate to stay an ordinariate, it has to be like tiny.
Oh yeah, no. So think about the military archdiocese, right? It was an ordinary. It was an ordinariate and had a bishop. But then they just got, they had so many chapels and so many places that they decided that they needed an archbishop and then some regional assistants. And so it's now an archdiocese of military services.
So, like, I know when someone asks, like, what is an ordinariate, you know, the response I've heard, like, something that's run by an ordinary, but, like, what is the purpose of an ordinariate?
Yeah, good question. So an ordinariate, right? Again, imagine, it is, I mean, that's a very bare bones brass tacks. It is run by, it is a juridical structure run by an ordinary, right? It's an ordinary. And so what we are is a non-territorial juridical body, right? Or canonical body. So we have an ordinary who's in charge of our parishes. So basically Rome said our parishes, our practices are distinct enough within the Roman framework to be to have our own set of questions and answers and things like that need to be answered. So when a priest comes into when an Episcopalian priest, former Episcopalian priest, who's now Catholic, who wants to be ordained for the ordinariate, there's a whole other set of documents and everything else that local dioceses wouldn't have to go through. And so we have to go through, the chancery has to go through that, and they have to go straight to Rome, and the Pope has to sign it. That sort of thing. And so in that sense, there's a lot more just specified paperwork, things that a chancery has to do, that a modern chancery, that a modern Roman Catholic chancery, a localized chancery would have to do. And so rather than trying to put them where the pastoral provision, there was 1 or 2 or 3, like we had one here, there was one in San Antonio, there was one in Dallas, there was the one up in Maryland. And so a diocese can handle 1 dude, right? But now we're getting 100 dudes, right? Who want to come in, and so now that's a lot of paperwork, that's a lot of paper trail, and the specific needs of our groups. The other that's interesting is Rome allowed our jurisdiction to allow the ordinariates to maintain a bit of Anglicanism in its governance, in that the bishop is required to gather what's called a governing council, and they help him in making governmental decisions, right, within the structure of the church. So in local parish and local dioceses, the bishop is kind of fiat, like what he says goes. But in our system, in the ordinariates, he has to pass certain things by the governing council for their approval, considered approval. So that's something that makes us distinct on the governance, right? So every bishop is required to teach, govern, and sanctify. That's what Jesus was here to do, right? The anointed one, the Messiah, was a priest, a prophet, a king. Priest, prophet, king, priest, right? Sanctify. Prophet, teach. King, govern. So teach, govern, teach, sanctify, and govern. And so that's part of, even in that governing role, we are distinct from the rest. But not distinct enough to be, and not distinct meaning So a different rite, if you think like the Eastern rites and stuff, their mass was written by, right, St. John Chrysostom or St. Basil, or, those are the ours was not written by Thomas Cranmer, right? It was the ceremony, which was a version of the Western rite before there was such a thing as an all, altogether Roman rite. There was like the Gallagher and the Roman rite, and then most of that is Catholic. So, but now it's Roman, it's a part of Roman.
Part of the ordinary is supposed to receive a periodic approval, is that true or no? Like to exist from every Catholic doesn't go there.
Not to my knowledge, no. I mean what do you call it? The Constitution means that we exist. There is, so what happened, probably where they're thinking is in Australia, for example. Austria, just like any diocese, like if you don't have people, then you don't have a diocese, kind of thing. And so a diocese can get amalgamated into another diocese, or if it gets too big, it can get split. Like I wasn't even Catholic, but I was going to Catholic high school because Mom made me for the college prep. But I remember when Victoria got split off, right? The Diocese of Victoria was like split from parts of San Antonio and parts of Houston, Dallas and Houston, and they made Victoria out of it. And so that kind of stuff happens, right? Where it's just, it gets too big, okay, let's break it apart and into smaller, serviceable chunks. Or it gets too small, and maybe we just, tie it to another. So in Australia, the Ordinariate there didn't catch that second wind. So a lot of the guys in the very beginnings of even our Ordinariate, a lot of the guys that came in were coming in at retirement age. And so they came in with their communities, but they were also about retirement age. So a lot of those early communities had a hard time, because then Father was there for like 3 years, 5 years, and he retired. And it's like, so now what do we do, right? We don't have any other priests, because you came in with that guy, and now that guy is retired. So we find a local priest, and now part of a member of it was a wonky thing. But we, here in America, had enough, and we had enough vocations coming in because we've been here for 30-something years, so we had people who are young men who have been raised in the community from the 90s and the 2000s and stuff, who were in the seminary for us, so that they could go fill in where these guys were retired. So that was a beautiful thing. But Australia didn't really have that for a while, and so a lot of their guys were just retired, and so what was their parishes were kind of boundary. And so what they ended up doing was they needed to give it some structure and some real juridic presence, like some stability, and that comes with a bishop. And so we had an ordinary there, who again, he retired. And so when that happened, our bishop went over there along with the bishop, or another bishop, and they sat there with the local Australian bishop in like the kind of like Texas is really where we have it's really weird, but most of our ordinariates are either in Texas or in like Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Southern California, and now the South is growing. But they're in these pockets. So in Australia, the bishop there now of that Broken Bay, he is their he's their supervisor or whatever it is. So he's a local diocesan bishop, but he runs the Ordinariate almost like a deanery, like a region for him, even though it's not local, it's all over the place, but he runs it like a deanery kind of thing. And now they have a bishop, and now they have like a chancery, a full functioning chancery that can help them with, getting their feet off the ground and getting, paperwork filed and getting, even just getting like communications work out so they can get people to like come and try come try seminary, right? You gotta make flyers and stuff like that when you have these little bitty parishes that can barely make their leaflets on Sundays, let alone trying to get vocations to young men to consider. So now they have a full functioning chancery to backstop them on that, which is really cool. But maybe that's good because that ordinary had to have a real heart-to-heart with Rome and with their local Australian bishops to say, is this actually functioning here in this place? And the decision was yes, but it needs help.
When you were talking about the litany and how he mentions all the saints that are in the reliquary, he ends it now by saying, "Blessed be the pearl, pray for us." Do we have a relic of blessed be the pearl?
We do. He's not an altar. He's right there in front of you. If he were there, he'd smack. So we have what's called the Martyr Chapel, right? So we have the main church, and we have the Holy House Chapel that's behind the doors, the Holy House, and then we have the Martyr Chapel over here. It's in the Martyr Chapel because we have in the altar there is Saint John Fisher, right? One of the bishops, the cardinal who would not sign off on Henry VIII's crazy scheme. And so John Fisher is there. So you're looking at the altar, look behind you, where that little credenza table is, and there's a big framed picture of Miguel Pro, and in the corner of it is a relic of Miguel Pro, is right there. And so he's in our Martyr Chapel too. So there's a real affinity. I gave a talk at the Adult Forum a couple of years ago on it. A real affinity. So a lot of the Reformation martyrs in the English Reformation were Jesuits, right? So think these Jesuits back in the day when men were men and Jesuits were Jesuits. They were from the country and they went away. They went over to the continent and they learned. They became priests just so they could get spirited and secreted back into their homeland where it was illegal to be a priest and to mass in secret and all this stuff and confessions behind closed doors. That's normal. But that you would do, that was the way Edmund Campion and John Ogilvie, the Scot. The one Scottish martyr of the Reformation, by the way, John Ogilvie, he's a Jesuit. He came back as a horse trader, and apparently was a very bad horse trader. And they found him out as a priest, and they drew and quartered him in Glasgow. But in Scotland, it was not punishable by death. It was punishable by exile to be a priest, to be a Catholic priest. But James the sixth had just been made James the First, and he needed to make a lesson, and so he used English rule in Scotland, and he had John Ogilvie martyred instead of exiled to prove a point. And the Scots were really ticked off, and so he never did it again. These Jesuits, the same thing happened with Miguel Pro, right? Miguel Pro's from Mexico. He gets spirited off to France to go learn to be a priest, or Italy, or wherever he went. And then he came back, sneaked into Mexico, just to go, and then he gets found and martyred. So very, very close affinity between the Cristero movement in Mexico and the Renaissance in England. It's really cool. Mirroring, and we have a martyr from both in our martyr chapel. We also apparently have a tragedy of his, that we have this violent tragedy that somebody came and said, "I see you have a relic of him here. My great-grandma gave me this tragedy and told me it was from Miguel Pro." But we can't display it, we have no way of proving its provenance. But somebody who's sick, come and we'll put it on you and see if you get a miracle.
Question. In regards
I'm sorry, Steve. We're way over time, I think. So I'm happy to stay as long as y'all want, but if y'all need to do so, God love you all. And Terry, do you have any questions or any comments before?
No, I'm just gonna turn this off. You've covered the meat of what we're gonna cover.
Yeah, no,
I think.
I was done 15 minutes